This is a continuation of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, comprising Parts 17 and 18. Part 17. He has slain the sacred son of Set. The harbor of Kimi lay between two great jutting points of land that ran into the ocean. He rounded the southern point, where the great black castles rose like a man-made hill, and entered the harbor just at dusk, when there was still enough light for the watchers to recognize the fisherman's boat and mantle, but not enough to permit recognition of betraying details. Unchallenged, he threaded his way among the great black war galleys lying silent and unlighted at anchor, and drew up to a flight of wide stone steps which mounted up from the water's edge. There he made his boat fast to an iron ring set in the stone, as numerous similar craft were tied. There was nothing strange in a fisherman leaving his boat there. None but a fisherman could find a use for such a craft, and they did not steal from one another. No one cast him more than a casual glance as he mounted the long steps, unobtrusively avoiding the torches that flared at intervals above the lapping black water. He seemed but an ordinary, empty-handed fisherman returning after a fruitless day along the coast. If one had observed him closely, it might have seemed that his step was somewhat too springy and sure, his carriage somewhat too erect and confident for a lowly fisherman. But he passed quickly, keeping in the shadows, and the commoners of Stygia were no more given to analysis than were the commoners of the less exotic races. In build, he was not unlike the warrior castes of the Stygians, who were a tall, muscular race. Bronzed by the sun, he was nearly as dark as many of them. His black hair, square cut and confined by a copper band, increased the resemblance. The characteristics which set him apart from them were the subtle difference in his walk and his alien features and blue eyes. But the mantle was a good disguise, and he kept as much in the shadows as possible, turning away his head when a native passed him too closely. But it was a desperate game, and he knew he could not long keep up the deception. Kemi was not like the seaports of the Hyborians, where types of every race swarmed. The only aliens here were Negro and Shemite slaves, and he resembled neither even as much as he resembled the Stygians themselves. Strangers were not welcome in the cities of Stygia, tolerated only when they came as ambassadors or licensed traders. But even then the latter were not allowed ashore after dark, and now there were no Hyborian ships in the harbor at all. A strange restlessness ran through the city, a stirring of ancient ambitions, a whispering none could define except those who whispered. This Conan felt rather than knew, his wedded primitive instincts sensing unrest about him. If he were discovered, his fate would be ghastly. They would slay him merely for being a stranger. If he were recognized as Amra, the corsair chief who had swept their coasts with steel and flame, an involuntary shudder twitched Conan's broad shoulders. Human foes he did not fear, nor any death by steel or fire. But this was a black land of sorcery and nameless horror. Set the old serpent, men said, banished long ago from the Hyborian races, yet lurked in the shadows of the cryptic temples, and awful and mysterious were the deeds done in the nighted shrines. He had drawn away from the waterfront streets with their broad steps leading down to the water, and was entering the long, shadowy streets of the main part of the city. There was no such scene as was offered by any Hyborian city. No blaze of lamps and cressets, with gay-clad people laughing and strolling along the pavements, and shops and stalls wide open and displaying their wares. Here the stalls were closed at dusk. The only lights along the streets were torches, flaring smokily at wide intervals. People walking the streets were comparatively few. They went hurriedly and unspeaking, and their numbers decreased with the lateness of the hour. Conan found the scene gloomy and unreal. The silence of the people, their furtive haste, the great black stone walls that rose on each side of the streets. There was a grim massiveness about Stygian architecture that was overpowering and oppressive. Few lights showed anywhere, except in the upper parts of the buildings. Conan knew that most of the people lay on the flat roofs, among the palms of artificial gardens under the stars. There was a murmur of weird music from somewhere. Occasionally a bronze chariot rumbled along the flags, and there was a brief glimpse of a tall, hawk-faced noble, with a silk cloak wrapped about him, and a gold band with a rearing serpent head emblem confining his black mane, of the ebon-naked charioteer bracing his knotty legs against the straining of the fierce Stygian horses. But the people who yet traversed the streets on foot were commoners, slaves, tradesmen, harlots, toilers, and they became fewer as he progressed. He was making toward the temple of Set, where he knew he would be likely to find the priest he sought. He believed he would know Thutmose if he saw him, though his one glance had been in the semi-darkness of the Mesantian alley. That the man he had seen there had been the priest he was certain. Only occultists high in the mazes of the hideous black ring possessed the power of the black hand that dealt death by its touch, and only such a man would dare defy Thoth Amon, whom the Western world knew only as a figure of terror and myth. The street broadened, and Conan was aware that he was getting into the part of the city dedicated to the temples. The great structures reared their black bulks against the dim stars, grim, indescribably menacing in the flare of the few torches. And suddenly he heard a low scream from a woman on the other side of the street and somewhat ahead of him. A naked courtesan, wearing the tall plumed headdress of her class. She was shrinking back against the wall, staring across at something he could not yet see. At her cry, the few people on the street halted suddenly as if frozen. At the same instant, Conan was aware of a sinister slithering ahead of him. Then, about the dark corner of the building he was approaching, poked a hideous wedge-shaped head, and after it flowed coil after coil of rippling, darkly glistening trunk. The Cimmerian recoiled, remembering tales he had heard. Serpents were sacred to Set, god of Stygia, who men said was himself a serpent. Monsters such as this were kept in the temples of Set, and when they hungered, were allowed to crawl forth into the streets to take what prey they wished. Their ghastly feasts were considered a sacrifice to the scaly god. The Stygians within Conan's sight fell to their knees, men and women, and passively awaited their fate. One the great serpent would select, would lap in scaly coils, crush to a red pulp, and swallow, as a rat snake swallows a mouse. The others would live. That was the will of the gods. But it was not Conan's will. The python glided toward him, its attention probably attracted by the fact that he was the only human in sight still standing erect. Gripping his great knife under his mantle, Conan hoped the slimy brute would pass him by. But it halted before him and reared up horrifically in the flickering torchlight, its forked tongue flickering in and out, its cold eyes glittering with the ancient cruelty of the serpent folk. Its neck arched, but before it could dart, Conan whipped his knife from under his mantle and struck like a flicker of lightning. The broad blade split that wedge-shaped head and sheared deep into the thick neck. Conan wrenched his knife free and sprang clear as the great body nodded and looped and whipped terrifically in its death throes. In the moment that he stood staring in morbid fascination, the only sound was the thud and swish of the snake's tail against the stones. Then from the shocked votaries burst a terrible cry. "Blasphemer! He has slain the sacred son of Set! Slay him! Slay! Slay!" Stones whizzed about him, and the crazed Stygians rushed at him, shrieking hysterically, while from all sides others emerged from their houses and took up the cry. With a curse, Conan wheeled and darted into the black mouth of an alley. He heard the patter of bare feet on the flags behind him as he ran more by feel than by sight, and the walls resounded to the vengeful yells of the pursuers. Then his left hand found a break in the wall, and he turned sharply into another, narrower alley. On both sides rose sheer black stone walls. High above him, he could see a thin line of stars. These giant walls, he knew, were the walls of temples. He heard, behind him, the pack sweep past the dark mouth in full cry. Their shouts grew distant, faded away. They had missed the smaller alley and run straight on in the blackness. He too kept straight ahead, though the thought of encountering another of Setsasons in the darkness brought a shudder from him. Then somewhere ahead of him, he caught a moving glow, like that of a crawling glowworm. He halted, flattened himself against the wall, and gripped his knife. He knew what it was, a man approaching with a torch. Now it was so close he could make out the dark hand that gripped it, and the dim oval of a dark face. A few more steps, and the man would certainly see him. He sank into a tigerish crouch. The torch halted. A door was briefly etched in the glow, while the torchbearer fumbled with it. Then it opened, the tall figure vanished through it, and darkness closed again on the alley. There was a sinister suggestion of furtiveness about that slinking figure, entering the alley door in darkness. A priest, perhaps, returning from some dark errand. But Conan groped toward the door. If one man came up that alley with a torch, others might come at any time. To retreat the way he had come might mean to run full into the mob from which he was fleeing. At any moment they might return, find the narrower alley, and come howling down it. He felt hemmed in by those sheer, unscalable walls, desirous of escape, even if escape meant invading some unknown building. The heavy bronze door was not locked. It opened under his fingers, and he peered through the crack. He was looking into a great square chamber of massive black stone. A torch smoldered in a niche in the wall. The chamber was empty. He glided through the lacquered door and closed it behind him. His sandaled feet made no sound as he crossed the black marble floor. A teak door stood partly open, and gliding through this, knife in hand, he came out into a great, dim, shadowy place whose lofty ceiling was only a hint of darkness high above him, toward which the black walls swept upward. On all sides, black arched doorways opened into the great still hall. It was lit by curious bronze lamps that gave a dim, weird light. On the other side of the great hall, a broad black marble stairway, without a railing, marched upward to lose itself in gloom, and above him on all sides, dim galleries hung like black stone ledges. Conan shivered. He was in a temple of some Stygian god, if not Set himself, then someone barely less grim, and the shrine did not lack an occupant. In the midst of the great hall stood a black stone altar, massive, somber, without carvings or ornament, and upon it coiled one of the great sacred serpents, its iridescent scales shimmering in the lamplight. It did not move, and Conan remembered stories that the priests kept these creatures drugged part of the time. The Cimmerian took an uncertain step out from the door, then shrank back suddenly, not into the room he had just quitted, but into a velvet-curtained recess. He had heard a soft step somewhere nearby. From one of the black arches emerged a tall, powerful figure in sandals and silken loincloth, with a wide mantle trailing from his shoulders. But face and head were hidden by a monstrous mask, a half-bestial, half-human countenance, from the crest of which floated a mass of ostrich plumes. In certain ceremonies, the Stygian priests went masked. Conan hoped the man would not discover him, but some instinct warned the Stygian. He turned abruptly from his destination, which apparently was the stair, and stepped straight to the recess. As he jerked aside the velvet hanging, a hand darted from the shadows, crushed the cry in his throat, and jerked him headlong into the alcove, and the knife impaled him. Conan's next move was the obvious one suggested by logic. He lifted off the grinning mask and drew it over his own head. The fisherman's mantle he flung over the body of the priest, which he concealed behind the hangings, and drew the priestly mantle about his own brawny shoulders. Fate had given him a disguise. All Kimi might well be searching now for the blasphemer who dared defend himself against a sacred snake. But who would dream of looking for him under the mask of a priest? He strode boldly from the alcove and headed for one of the arched doorways at random, but he had not taken a dozen strides when he wheeled again, all his senses edged for peril. A band of masked figures filed down the stair, apparelled exactly as he was. He hesitated, caught in the open, and stood still, trusting to his disguise, though cold sweat gathered on his forehead and the backs of his hands. No word was spoken. Like phantoms, they descended into the great hall and moved past him toward a black arch. The leader carried an ebon staff, which supported a grinning white skull, and Conan knew it was one of the ritualistic processions so inexplicable to a foreigner, but which played a strong, and often sinister, part in the Stygian religion. The last figure turned his head slightly toward the motionless Cimmerian, as if expecting him to follow. Not to do what was obviously expected of him would rouse instant suspicion. Conan fell in behind the last man and suited his gait to their measured pace. They traversed a long, dark, vaulted corridor in which, Conan noticed uneasily, the skull on the staff glowed phosphorescently. He felt a surge of unreasoning, wild animal panic that urged him to rip out his knife and slash right and left at these uncanny figures, to flee madly from the grim, dark temple. But he held himself in check, fighting down the dim, monstrous intuitions that rose in the back of his mind and peopled the gloom with shadowy shapes of horror. And presently he barely stifled a sigh of relief as they filed through a great double-valved door, which was 3 times higher than a man, and emerged into the starlight. Conan wondered if he dared fade into some dark alley, but hesitated, uncertain, and down the long dark street they padded silently, while such folk as they met turned their heads away and fled from them. The procession kept far out from the walls. To turn and bolt into any of the alleys they passed would be too conspicuous. While he mentally fumed and cursed, they came to a low-arched gateway in the southern wall, and through this they filed. Ahead of them and about them, lay clusters of low, flat-topped mud houses and palm groves, shadowy in the starlight. Now, if ever, thought Conan, was his time to escape his silent companions. But the moment the gate was left behind them, those companions were no longer silent. They began to mutter excitedly among themselves. The measured, ritualistic gate was abandoned. The staff with its skull was tucked unceremoniously under the leader's arm, and the whole group broke ranks and hurried onward, and Conan hurried with them. For in the low murmur of speech he had caught a word that galvanized him. The word was Thutothmes. Part 18. I am the woman who never died. Conan stared with burning interest at his masked companions. One of them was Thutothmes, or else the destination of the band was a rendezvous with the man he sought. And he knew what that destination was, when beyond the palms he glimpsed a black triangular bulk looming against the shadowy sky. They passed through the belt of huts and groves, and if any man saw them, he was careful not to show himself. The huts were dark. Behind them, the black towers of Kimi rose gloomily against the stars that were mirrored in the waters of the harbor. Ahead of them, the desert stretched away in dim darkness. Somewhere, a jackal yapped. The quick-passing sandals of the silent neophytes made no noise in the sand. They might have been ghosts, moving toward that colossal pyramid that rose out of the murk of the desert. There was no sound over all the sleeping land. Conan's heart beat quicker as he gazed at the grim black wedge that stood etched against the stars, and his impatience to close with Thutothmes, in whatever conflict the meeting might mean, was not unmixed with a fear of the unknown. No man could approach one of those somber piles of black stone without apprehension. The very name was a symbol of repellent horror among the northern nations, and legends hinted that the Stygians did not build them, that they were in the land at whatever immeasurably ancient date the dark-skinned people came into the land of the great river. As they approached the pyramid, he glimpsed a dim glow near the base, which presently resolved itself into a doorway, on either side of which brooded stone lions with the heads of women, cryptic, inscrutable, nightmares crystallized in stone. The leader of the band made straight for the doorway, in the deep well of which Conan saw a shadowy figure. The leader paused an instant beside this dim figure, and then vanished into the dark interior, and one by one, the others followed. As each masked priest passed through the gloomy portal, he was halted briefly by the mysterious guardian, and something passed between them, some word or gesture Conan could not make out. Seeing this, the Cimmerian purposely lagged behind, and stooping, pretended to be fumbling with the fastening of his sandal. Not until the last of the masked figures had disappeared did he straighten and approach the portal. He was uneasily wondering if the guardian of the temple were human, remembering some tales he had heard, but his doubts were set at rest. A dim bronze cresset glowing just within the door lighted a long, narrow corridor that ran away into blackness, and a man standing silent in the mouth of it, wrapped in a wide black cloak. No one else was in sight. Obviously the masked priests had disappeared down the corridor. Over the cloak that was drawn about his lower features, the Stygian's piercing eyes regarded Conan sharply. With his left hand he made a curious gesture. On a venture Conan imitated it. But evidently another gesture was expected. The Stygian's right hand came from under his cloak with a gleam of steel, and his murderous stab would have pierced the heart of an ordinary man. But he was dealing with one whose thews were nerved to the quickness of a jungle cat. Even as the dagger flashed in the dim light, Conan caught the dusky wrist and smashed his clenched right fist against the Stygian's jaw. The man's head went back against the stone wall with a dull crunch that told of a fractured skull. Standing for an instant above him, Conan listened intently. The cresset burned low, casting vague shadows about the door. Nothing stirred in the blackness beyond, though far away and below him, as it seemed, he caught the faint muffled note of a gong. He stooped and dragged the body behind the great bronze door which stood wide, opened inward, and then the Cimmerian went warily but swiftly down the corridor, toward what doom he did not even try to guess. He had not gone far when he halted, baffled. The corridor split in two branches, and he had no way of knowing which the masked priest had taken. At a venture, he chose the left. The floor slanted slightly downward and was worn smooth as by many feet. Here and there, a dim cresset cast a faint nightmarish twilight. Conan wondered uneasily for what purpose these colossal piles had been reared in what forgotten age. This was an ancient land. No man knew how many ages the black temples of Stygia had looked against the stars. Narrow black arches opened occasionally to right and left, but he kept to the main corridor, although a conviction that he had taken the wrong branch was growing in him. Even with their start on him, he should have overtaken the priest by this time. He was growing nervous. The silence was like a tangible thing, and yet he had a feeling that he was not alone. More than once, passing a nighted arch, he seemed to feel the glare of unseen eyes fixed upon him. He paused, half-minded to turn back to where the corridor had first branched. He wheeled abruptly, knife lifted, every nerve tingling. A girl stood at the mouth of a smaller tunnel, staring fixedly at him. Her ivory skin showed her to be Stygian of some ancient noble family. And like all such women, she was tall, lithe, voluptuously figured, her hair a great pile of black foam, among which gleamed a sparkling ruby. But for her velvet sandals and broad jewel-crusted girdle about her supple waist, she was quite nude. "What do you here?" she demanded. To answer would betray his alien origin. He remained motionless, a grim, somber figure in the hideous mask, with the plumes floating over him. His alert gaze sought the shadows behind her and found them empty. But there might be hordes of fighting men within her call. She advanced toward him, apparently without apprehension, though with suspicion. "You are not a priest," she said. "You are a fighting man. Even with that mask that is plain. There is as much difference between you and a priest as there is between a man and a woman." "By Set!" she exclaimed, halting suddenly, her eyes flaring wide. "I do not believe you are even a Stygian." With a movement too quick for the eye to follow, his hand closed about her round throat, lightly as a caress. "Not a sound out of you," he muttered. Her smooth ivory flesh was cold as marble, yet there was no fear in the wide, dark, marvelous eyes which regarded him. "Do not fear," she answered calmly. "I will not betray you. But are you mad to come, a stranger and a foreigner, to the forbidden temple of Set?" "I'm looking for the priest Thuthothmes," he answered. "Is he in this temple? Why do you seek him?" She parried. "He has something of mine which was stolen." "I will lead you to him," she volunteered so promptly that his suspicions were instantly roused. "Don't play with me, girl," he growled. "I do not play with you. I have no love for Thuthothmes." He hesitated, then made up his mind. After all, he was as much in her power as she was in his. "Walk beside me," he commanded, shifting his grasp from her throat to her wrist. "But walk with care. If you make a suspicious move." She led him down the slanting corridor, down and down, until there were no more cressets, and he groped his way in darkness, aware less by sight than by feel and sense of the woman at his side. Once when he spoke to her, she turned her head toward him, and he was startled to see her eyes glowing like golden fire in the dark. Dim doubts and vague, monstrous suspicions haunted his mind. But he followed her, through a labyrinthine maze of black corridors that confused even his primitive sense of direction. He mentally cursed himself for a fool, allowing himself to be led into that black abode of mystery. But it was too late to turn back now. Again he felt life and movement in the darkness about him, sensed peril and hunger burning impatiently in the blackness. Unless his ears deceived him, he caught a faint sliding noise that ceased and receded at a muttered command from the girl. She led him at last into a chamber lighted by a curious 7-branched candelabrum in which black candles burned weirdly. He knew they were far below the earth. The chamber was square, with walls and ceiling of polished black marble and furnished after the manner of the ancient Stygians. There was a couch of ebony, covered with black velvet, and on a black stone dais lay a carven mummy case. Conan stood waiting expectantly, staring at the various black arches which opened into the chamber. But the girl made no move to go farther. Stretching herself on the couch with feline suppleness, she intertwined her fingers behind her sleek head and regarded him from under long, drooping lashes. "Well?" he demanded impatiently. "What are you doing? Where's Thuthothmes?" "There is no haste," she answered lazily. "What is an hour, or a day, or a year, or a century, for that matter? Take off your mask. Let me see your features." With a grunt of annoyance, Conan dragged off the bulky headpiece, and the girl nodded as if in approval as she scanned his dark-scarred face and blazing eyes. "There is strength in you, great strength. You could strangle a bullock." He moved restlessly, his suspicion growing. With his hand on his hilt, he peered into the gloomy arches. "If you've brought me into a trap," he said, "you won't live to enjoy your handiwork. Are you going to get off that couch and do as you promised, or do I have to?" His voice trailed away. He was staring at the mummy case, on which the countenance of the occupant was carved in ivory with the startling vividness of a forgotten art. There was a disquieting familiarity about that carven mask, and with something of a shock, he realized what it was. There was a startling resemblance between it and the face of the girl lolling on the ebon couch. She might have been the model from which it was carved, but he knew the portrait was at least centuries old. Archaic hieroglyphics were scrawled across the lacquered lid, and, seeking back into his mind for tag ends of learning, picked up here and there as incidentals of an adventurous life, he spelled them out and said aloud, "Akivasha." "You have heard of Princess Akivasha?" inquired the girl on the couch. "Who hasn't?" he grunted. The name of that ancient, evil, beautiful princess still lived the world over in song and legend, though 10,000 years had rolled their cycles since the daughter of Tutaman had reveled in purple feasts amid the black halls of ancient luxury. Her only sin was that she loved life and all the meanings of life, said the Stygian girl. To win life, she courted death. She could not bear to think of growing old and shriveled and worn, and dying at last, as hags die. She wooed darkness like a lover, and his gift was life, life that, not being life as mortals know it, can never grow old and fade. She went into the shadows to cheat age and death. Conan glared at her with eyes that were suddenly burning slits, and he wheeled and tore the lid from the sarcophagus. It was empty. Behind him, the girl was laughing, and the sound froze the blood in his veins. He whirled back to her, the short hairs on his neck bristling. "You are Akivasha," he grated. She laughed and shook back her burnished locks, spread her arms sensuously. "I am Akivasha. I am the woman who never died, who never grew old, who fools say was lifted from the earth by the gods in the full bloom of her youth and beauty, to queen it forever in some celestial clime. Nay, it is in the shadows that mortals find immortality. 10,000 years ago, I died to live forever. Give me your lips, strong man." Rising lithely, she came to him, rose on tiptoe, and flung her arms about his massive neck. Scowling down into her upturned, beautiful countenance, he was aware of a fearful fascination and an icy fear. "Love me," she whispered, her head thrown back, eyes closed and lips parted. "Give me of your blood to renew my youth and perpetuate my everlasting life. I will make you, too, immortal. I will teach you the wisdom of all the ages, all the secrets that have lasted out the eons in the blackness beneath these dark temples. I will make you king of that shadowy horde which revels among the tombs of the ancients when night veils the desert and bats flit across the moon. I am weary of priests and magicians and captive girls dragged screaming through the portals of death. I desire a man. Love me, barbarian." She pressed her dark head down against his mighty breast, and he felt a sharp pang at the base of his throat. With a curse, he tore her away and flung her sprawling across the couch. "Damned vampire!" Blood was trickling from a tiny wound in his throat. She reared up on the couch like a serpent poised to strike, all the golden fires of hell blazing in her wide eyes. Her lips drew back, revealing white pointed teeth. "Fool!" she shrieked. "Do you think to escape me? You will live and die in darkness. I have brought you far below the temple. You can never find your way out alone. You can never cut your way through those which guard the tunnels. But for my protection, the sons of Set would long ago have taken you into their bellies. Fool, I shall yet drink your blood. Keep away from me, or I'll slash you asunder," he grunted, his flesh crawling with revulsion. "You may be immortal, but steel will dismember you." As he backed toward the arch through which he had entered, the light went out suddenly. All the candles were extinguished at once, though he did not know how, for Akivasha had not touched them. But the vampire's laugh rose mockingly behind him, poison sweet as the vials of hell, and he sweated as he groped in the darkness for the arch in a near panic. His fingers encountered an opening, and he plunged through it. Whether it was the arch through which he had entered he did not know, nor did he very much care. His one thought was to get out of the haunted chamber, which had housed that beautiful, hideous, undead fiend for so many centuries. His wanderings through those black winding tunnels were a sweating nightmare. Behind him and about him, he heard faint slitherings and glidings, and once the echo of that sweet, hellish laughter he had heard in the chamber of Akivasha. He slashed ferociously at sounds and movements he heard, or imagined he heard, in the darkness near him, and once his sword cut through some yielding tenuous substance that might have been cobwebs. He had a desperate feeling that he was being played with, lured deeper and deeper into ultimate night, before being set upon by demoniac talon and fang. And through his fear ran the sickening revulsion of his discovery. The legend of Akivasha was so old, and among the evil tales told of her ran a thread of beauty and idealism, of everlasting youth. To so many dreamers and poets and lovers, she was not alone the evil princess of Stygian legend, but the symbol of eternal youth and beauty, shining forever in some far realm of the gods. And this was the hideous reality. This foul perversion was the truth of that everlasting life. Through his physical revulsion ran the sense of a shattered dream of man's idolatry. Its glittering gold proved slime and cosmic filth. A wave of futility swept over him, a dim fear of the falseness of all men's dreams and idolatries. And now he knew that his ears were not playing him tricks. He was being followed, and his pursuers were closing in on him. In the darkness sounded shufflings and slidings that were never made by human feet. No, nor by the feet of any normal animal. The underworld had its bestial life too, perhaps. They were behind him. He turned to face them, though he could see nothing, and slowly backed away. Then the sound ceased, even before he turned his head and saw, somewhere down the long corridor, a glow of light. This concludes the 9th part of 12 total of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror by Robert E. Howard, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.